this because I'm out on a farm, see. But anyway, I'm on a farm at the moment.
Welcome to Game of Nodes, a weekly podcast on Cosmos from independent validator teams. Hello and welcome to Game of Nodes, a weekly podcast from independent validator teams on the Cosmos. And Null is out on a farm and complaining about his internet. Nothing's really new there if you watched last week's episode. And we're joined by James from SubQuery. We're going to talk about what a SubQuery is and why I should want one. But first, we're going to cover off some follow-up questions from last week. And both Usurper and James are going to tell us all about consensus in Austin. It's going to make us feel very, very jealous that we weren't there. Because I have been in a loft and Null has been in the bush. So clearly we weren't at consensus, which is very, very distressing. First, the big follow-up we have obviously is on the Osmosis halt, right? But Schultz is our resident Osmosis expert and he's been rugged by the power cut in, are we allowed to say where he lives now? Is that doxing?
I don't know.
He lives in a, are we not allowed to say? Okay, we're not allowed to say he lives in a place with bad power grid, and he has been rugged by the power grid. So that's why Schultz is not on today's episode being wholesome.
This is not the first time he's been rugged either by the old power.
That's correct. Yeah,
I think 2 out of 3 of the most recent episodes he's been rugged by power cuts, which begs a lot of questions about living there, but.
At least he doesn't have bad internet.
He's not good into that.
It's not shit house.
He was able to tell us that the power was out, but I guess that was immobile or something. I don't really know how he got the word out, smoke signal or something like that. Usurper, is there something that you add something to the Osmosis follow up, or is it just simply we're back, hooray?
I think we're back, hooray. I think there was concerns about that they were going to make a. There was some discussion around a state change, right? I think when we left it last week, they had 4. There was 4 suspect accounts. I think had volumes high enough in this little defect scan, whatever we want to call that. And I believe the other 2, I think they tracked those owners down. This is all consensus rumor, by the way. But what I heard that they tracked those 2 individuals down by going through the CEXs and identifying who they were and then communicating out. And once they communicated out, there was some, we'll return that right away. I could be wrong on that whole story. That's just kind of secondhand, but that's what I understand. So from my perspective, I think then those funds were returned, maybe post restart, possibly. And the issue was fixed and the chain was restarted, I think, without any drama. Is that everybody else's understanding of the situation?
Yeah, that was roughly what I had. I mean, I know we were talking last week about whether or not the especially the fire stake thing happened because they realized they'd been busted, or whether or not it was actually a genuine sort of, we did actually screw up and want to return the funds, rather than somebody tapping you on the shoulder and going,
right,
we know it's you lads. You literally did it with your validator account. What were you doing?
You never know it's a real exploit until you get past the first million. That's what they always say.
That's what they say. Yeah. It does. Whatever. I mean, it sucks. Sorry for the Osmosis guys. Glad that they're back up, I guess, is the conclusion from that one. So there was some talk as well about ICA host functionality and stuff last week. We were kind of nibbling around the edges of that, and I guess the other thing that's happened for us was we ran a chain upgrade on Juno, which enabled ICA host functionality for the testnet, so we can play around with it. And I think almost all of us were AFK when it happened.
It was.
Our automation is good enough that it just happened. But I think like most of us. Well, I know certainly you've got a very cool setup now on the testnet, haven't you? Usurper, because you're Horcruxing it up, aren't you?
I am, yeah. We're still Horcruxing it up. I'm still trying to figure out what that's going to look like, and if I had time to actually build it out the way I want to build it out. But it's getting there. We'll get there. And can you talk about what that ICA thing is for us that don't know exactly what that is?
Okay, so Interchain Accounts, ICA, for short, for those that want to just shorten things incessantly. Mm-hmm. the key components of ICA are that there's a host chain and there's a controller chain. So the host chain is the one that is being interacted with, if you like, and exposes functionality that can be used by other chains. The controller chain is the one that's actually sort of doing the controlling, and that has some pretty heavy implications for authentication. There is a default implementation of the authentication part with a lot of capital letters warnings on it, saying do not use in production, etc., 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 etc. So Joe Abbey, another common panelist, if you like, on Game of Nodes, and I have been working on that a little bit. And yeah, we decided essentially that a staged approach to getting it out made sense, because the full requirements of authentication to be a controller chain aren't really clear. And having spoken to other chain core teams, the general feeling I got, and please, if we're just being cowardly custards, like, just say on Twitter and say that we can just do it, don't worry about it. But the impression we've got was that most chains who are doing ICA functionality at the moment are doing host first and waiting for somebody else to jump on controller. Okay. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because a lot of the time what you actually want to do is allow other chains to interact with the applications on your chain, especially if you're a smart contract chain. So the kind of functionality that Juno is exposing is, smart contract executions, smart contract instantiation. It's the kind of stuff that an AMM might need to do, that anything interacting with NFTs, CW20s, that kind of stuff, is going to want to instantiate and execute smart contracts. And so those are the things that are initially exposed, as well as the native modules, so that you can do bank sends and that kind of stuff. All the other things that you're going to expect to do for sort of advanced IBC interactions, I guess. ICA interactions.
Can I take us on topic and go deeper on that? Completely off topic right off the bat. So the ICA piece, can there be chains in between those two endpoints, or is it always one-to-one?
It's always a controller chain and a host chain.
And there's nothing in between, right? Like there's no other. The reason I'm asking this, one thing that came up a lot was at Consensus, which we'll talk about a little bit, is there's a lot of conversation on the Cosmos discussion around the role of the hub, right? And the idea right now that this is very mesh based, but as we grow from 60 chains in Osmosis to 250 or to 30,000, then the hub idea is going to come back, and maybe it's one hub, or maybe there's multiple hubs, and blah 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 blah. And Interchain Account seems to be an item that would delay that more than enable it, right? Because you kind of need that IBC to IBC
further. Yeah. It does, however, I suppose, the way I was kind of thinking about it the other day is that if you have a chain like Juno, it works very well for, because there's this idea that you can build a thing on Juno, get product market fit, off you crack, make your own chain. In that model, it makes a lot of sense to deploy your application on Juno, have literally a smart contract, let's say a registry from Juno's perspective, let's say, here are the IBC channels that matter, or here are the coin denominations that actually map to these human readable representations of them, or whatever. Because obviously the IBC denoms are different on every chain or whatever. But there are probably ways, as soon as you can start interacting with smart contracts on a smart contract chain, where you can say, okay, look, well, from our point of view, right, from this chain, addressability looks like this. Here are the things we care about, and here are what they're called. And then from another chain, you can kind of decide, well, which chain is the canonical chain that we sort of care about from that perspective, I guess. So I think it doesn't, like you say, it doesn't say like, oh, we just stick that on the hub and we're done. But it does mean that people can decide potentially which host chain they want to use for saying what a source of truth is on a given thing that might be fragmented. The one that jumps into my head is IBC denoms, but that's actually not really. Is that a problem that anybody's having? I'm not sure it is, but I know it's just a thing that jumps into my head as different on every chain.
Can multiple chains be a controller chain to another one?
Yeah. So it's kind of scoped to the interaction.
There's a risk of race conditions here where one chain kind of issues a command that another chain does at a very similar time, and how do you kind of merge together those two actions? And
well, indeed. I mean, so a lot of that is actually controlled by the authentication controller. So it's I don't fully understand every bit about the mechanism. I'd be lying. I would be actually quite surprised if anybody outside of the folks that implemented the ICA spec fully understand that. But that is the role of the essentially the authentication piece. But then also the fact that any instruction, any transaction you submit is going to be part of a block. So then all of the usual guarantees of validity on the, let me get this right, host chain apply, because obviously that's all the part of the anti-handler and the keeper in the Cosmos SDK of saying like, well, is this actually a valid inclusion in the block, and that validation has to be run before it can be included. So there conceivably is a type of 0-day that somebody hasn't ever thought of because of the context. But if certainly, I guess at the native level, all of the interaction with the native SDK modules should be covered, I guess, by the existing data validations that govern transaction inclusion in a block, I think. But I'm not an expert on that mechanism, so could well be
the
wrong.
leading frontier of technology, right? I
mean, you really sound like an expert, so that's all important, right?
And please, no more 0-day discoveries on Game of Nodes. Let's try to keep that to a bare minimum.
Yeah, I think the thing, I guess the thing that sort of worries me is like, because we've gone through the whole Cosmos and getting to 1.0 fun time, and during that audit process there were a couple of minor things and there were a couple of actual 0 days, and the ICA piece is quite complex, and there's also things you can interact with like individual modules that chains will implement that aren't part of the kind of core set of modules that every chain has, like bank, like staking, distribution, etc. So if you expose that functionality to controller chains, there's probably your attack surface it suddenly gets much bigger and much more complex. So although in principle my understanding is it shouldn't get any more complicated because the modules are modules and they're governed by the same security model as the rest of Cosmos. Like I say, like I've been surprised by security vulnerabilities before, so I'm not gonna say, oh yeah, it's totally secure, so that you can clip 2 seconds of it when it turns out to not be secure. So that in a nutshell is, I guess, why we're taking our time with it. But I think it's also a case of actually just having to read a lot of the source code and really understand what it's doing before we're sure whether we have, like I say, like kind of additional criteria for the authentication piece that we weren't aware of. Mm-hmm. Because it is like a lot of things in Cosmos, it's sort of described in a couple of blog posts, and then after that it's read the source code. So it escalates very quickly from you're interested in this thing, you might want to implement it, read the source code. There are, to be fair, there are a couple of pages of docs actually embedded in the source as well on how the ICA controller and auth bit works. So I'm being a little bit unfair, but I'm not going to pretend I fully understand it, and I'm not comfortable with things I don't fully understand. So that's why I'm putting the brakes on it. And I think Jabby is similar, I guess.
Cool.
So I'm just reading what Patmos has put down on here. So he's saying IBC denoms are an issue in his experience. So he's saying that there's a module called coin metadata module that might address that. Have any of you guys heard of that module? I haven't heard of that one yet.
I've not heard of that, but I have, I think, as I just said there, figured that there is a 5-minute implementation of a smart contract that can live on a host chain that interprets what an IBC denom is from the point of view of the chain into something that a human can read. I even actually, it's on my pad somewhere. Like if you have a little bit of time, investigate this. But yeah, if Patmos has already done that, that would be cool. That would save us all some time.
Well, I think he's saying that there is maybe a module that's in the works, potentially, I guess, for Cosmos SDK. Well, actually, he said both are in the works. So chain name service. So
yeah, I'd heard of that. That's Jack, isn't it?
I don't know.
Isn't that Strangelove?
So there is a working spec for coin metadata and chain name service data format in the chain registry. Oh, okay. So maybe who maintains the chain registry? That's on the Cosmos.
That Cosmos Hub? I think it's Cosmos Hub.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would make sense. But I guess the question is again, where is that going to live? If that's just going to live on the hub, then yeah, every chain is going to end up deploying it because that's sort of what every chain ends up doing, and then you're kind of back to the who you trusting argument. Not denying that it's something that is useful for developers, but
the denoms are a real pain in the ass on Cosmos, really, unless everything goes back to their host chain. And yeah, I can see that being a problem across the ICA for sure.
Unless you can deduplicate properly that this is the same denom as this denom, then you are kind of fucked as a user. And actually, as a developer, like Patmos just alluded to, like if you're trying to do complex DeFi things where you don't know where the tokens have come to you from, that is potentially an issue.
Was there any talk later on during consensus about like Terra 2 and where it's going and if it's a massive road?
From Terra 2, I don't really hear any conversations about it. I don't know if that's different from you, Super, but there weren't any many talks. Yeah.
Yeah. Not a thing. The only other stablecoin conversation I really heard anything about was the IST thing with Agoric. That's the only thing that really came up is Dean was up there and he was on stage talking about that, which maybe we can talk at a future date or something similar to that, but trying to talk about why that's a good idea.
So, well, I mean, if we're done with consensus talk, maybe we could talk a little bit about stable coins, unless we had something else already on the list to move on to, guys, because there has been talk, around the place about bringing new.
I think Frey and I are both chopping at the bit that bring up a specific topic that we want to talk about.
I'll go for it. I'll bring this shit up later.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're both looking at the same spreadsheet that you always doggedly refuse to actually open. Well, I mean, I'm looking at the bit that's in all bold that says "Topic of the Week." Null.
All about SubQuery
as well.
Yeah. The man joined us from New Zealand. Come on.
I mean, New Zealand's miles away. Like
miles.
It's like 13 hours from us. I mean, it's like an hour from you. I mean, it's a very long way away.
That's fine.
Why the fuck are you chopping and jumping around this spreadsheet? Like you've gone straight to the bottom and now you're going back up.
Consensus stuff is obviously it's an extraordinary addition to the spreadsheet now, which we actually did discuss before you joined in the pre-show, that we were going to cut it a little differently. So it's all about you snooze you lose. I think on this one.
Well, I think if you're going down a list and you skip shit, you skipped it. It's done.
It's done. We can never talk about it.
It's about the civil engineer here. It's just like you software guys. You just do everything without any kind of certification, without any kind of real engineering nous, without any understanding of how to put up a good old fashioned bridge.
It's an OL ordered list. Fucking in an order.
I copied it to the bottom of the list, so now it's back on the list.
Well, that's okay. It's practically a new item then.
All right.
So, with that little rebellion out of your system, are you happy to continue with the podcast, sir?
Sure. My internet's working much better now. Thank you for asking.
It is actually.
So James, I mean, I was kind of interested. Obviously, we've talked a little bit of some of these myriad, infinitely regressive Telegram groups that have been, I think, absorbing the life force of most of the core Juno team for the last few weeks. We need to get so Kevin's another friend of the show, if you like, and we were sort of saying, because it's absolutely impossible, even if you're inside the process, to keep track of what's actually going on. When it's all kind of said and done, we need to basically just like get Kevin with a town crier outfit on and a bell, and just be like, "Hear ye, hear ye. Here's the list of protocols that are joining," and then just read them all off at the top of the show, and then we can go, right, there we go. That's piece of news done. Now everybody's on the same page. All right, cool. Right, let's move on. But obviously, like I hadn't honestly heard much about SubQuery before we started talking to Terra projects, but it was pretty much the first thing that most started saying to us is, do you have to very good, do you have any deployment of SubQuery or working examples for running on Juno? Are you in touch with the SubQuery team? And obviously very quickly that came to pass, but like, from somebody who didn't know much about the organizational solution, I'm kind of just also interested in the background of the organization. Like, I have a background in RDF of all things, right? Linked data. So the dorkiest, arguably most dead end of all Web 2 technologies, but that's why I care about addressability and stuff. So I'm kind of wondering how you guys settled on indexing and stuff, and like what was the history of SubQuery and how you kind of chose this as your niche to sort of work in.
Yeah, we were doing like some infrastructure stuff. So our origins from the Polkadot ecosystem, and we were doing some infrastructure stuff for them. Polkadot and Cosmos, very similar in terms of like the outcome that we're trying to achieve. We're going about it different ways, but the outcome is the same, which is this multi-chain universe where everyone's got freedom to kind of build their own application chains that talk to each other and communicate well, and they're interoperable, right? It's the same outcome. We were doing a lot of infrastructure work for a lot of teams that were building in that ecosystem, and they kept asking us about indexing, right? If you want to build an application, you need indexing. And for those that are listening that don't know what indexing means, this is another buzzword that you have no idea what means in the outcome. Indexing is very simple, right? So a blockchain is a linked list. It's a glorified linked list. And for those that don't know what a linked list is, it's like a book of pages. Every 10 seconds, a new page is written to the book, which includes what happened in the last 10 seconds. And if you can imagine trying to convert a book into like something that you can build an application of, like, for example, just getting the transaction history of my account. If that's recorded in a book, you have to kind of go through each and every page looking for transactions to or from your account. It's the most inefficient way to query data. And that's one of the biggest problems of blockchains. It's a great way to store data in an immutable way, but it is a terrible way to have that data accessible so you can build brand new dApps off it, so you can use that in other platforms or ecosystems, so you can kind of interact with that data. And if you want to build a new application that's easy to use, you need access to data. It is critical. So SubQuery is a data indexer, very similar to what the Graph does on Ethereum. We've started Polkadot, and we're working our way through the non-ETH chains. That allows you to, in your own way, for your own application, index data from the blockchain. So when a new block is added, we will go through that block and we'll pull off exactly what you want, convert it to a format that is exactly what you need, and then allow you to then query that data using a language called GraphQL. So the outcome of building a SubQuery project, it's a very simple process, means that you have a brand new API specifically built for your application. It has exactly the data that you need, and it's much, much faster and more efficient than querying the database. It allows you to build better applications that are more user-friendly, more intuitive, faster. And the background to how we got to Cosmos is a bit of a windy path. We announced support for the Terra ecosystem a week before it all collapsed. So perfect timing. The kings of perfect timing. And but we were working with many of the teams in the Terra ecosystem. And many of those teams in the ecosystem, we talked about 20 or 30 of them, all very friendly. And as a side note, one of the things I really love about Terra, or the Terra teams, is that, your whole ecosystem collapsed. Your reserves are all lost because most of those teams had in UST. And most of those teams, the next day, weren't saying, maybe blockchain's not for me. they were saying, where am I building next? Where should I go and do this again? I still believe in this idea. Where am I going to build the application I was building in Terra? Where am I going to build that next? And one of the ecosystem teams in Cosmos, Juno, was very efficient at reaching out to a lot of these Terra teams, setting up the Terra Development Fund, to which we're a party of, or recipient of, and bringing these teams into the warm bosom of Juno. So that's kind of how we got here, right? But we support Polkadot, we support Avalanche, we support Cosmos. We started with Juno, we've tested Juno, but we believe it works with any Cosmos chain. So
it should work with Stargaze and
Algoric, and we're going to talk to Osmosis as well. Even the Cosmos Hub we've tested on. So now it's just a challenge of going and talking to all these teams and making sure it works well. But that's the background to what we do. But all these Terra teams that are coming over, and even the teams that are building on Juno and on other chains, we just provide that developer tool that makes life easier.
So essentially, again, for people listening, I guess we have enough technical people that probably this won't come as a surprise. So, but just to clarify, the indexing side is primarily the query end, isn't it? So you're writing to the blockchain. If you worked with a traditional, the way I was explaining, if you worked with a traditional web application, you have some kind of database interaction layer, and then there's a database. That interaction layer is usually some kind of an abstraction, like a line of business logic app, or back when I first started, it would be like a PHP or a Rails app or something like that, and then a database driver, and then probably Postgres or something, and then all you're really doing is orchestrating reads and writes. But in the blockchain world, we're sort of sending writes down to the blockchain, and then we're bringing up reads through an indexer. So at the moment, most Juno projects, for example, will be hitting a core chain RPC for live data constantly and doing a lot of filtering on the front end. And that can get pretty complex. Some regulars of the show will know that. So like this is something that regulars of the show know. I'm working on a social protocol with some other people. We're in private alpha at the moment, and we're totally fine on performance because it's a private alpha. But one of our principal concerns was, are we going to have to build our own indexer? So, selfishly, we're really happy that SubQuery have appeared on the scene, because an indexer is not something that you just lightly sort of get up one morning and you go,
but that's what most teams have had to do, right? And every time we enter an ecosystem where there's no provider like us, it's like all these teams have built their own wheel, from scratch, and it's just like it's a shame. But we're doing a lot of work to add support for as many different chains, and one of the big opportunities for us is a lot of the teams are thinking about other chains outside of Cosmos even, right? And being in Cosmos, you guys, I assume everyone believes that multi-chain interoperability will drive the next kind of adoption uptake of blockchain, or make our lives easier, or make consumers' lives easier in terms of the assets that they have. And so if we all believe that, then we certainly need these tools that make it easier for people to build applications on different chains in and outside of Cosmos.
So we've had a few questions in the chat. That microphone arm is amazing. I would like to know which one it is. Nice one. Usurper has responded with that. It's a Rode one. But we've got also a couple for James. So Patmos has asked, could you discuss a little bit more how SubQuery and Mantlemint differ from or complement one another, which obviously that might also need a bit of background for folks who are maybe more in the Cosmos ecosystem as to what Mantlemint actually is as well.
Yeah, so I'm no expert on this, but my understanding of Mantlemint is it is a much more organized and efficient node. It was built by the Terra team, if I'm not wrong. And it essentially is
That's correct.
It's a kind of layer on top of the core non-pruned archive node that makes it a lot more efficient to query. We actually use Mantlemint nodes. So the difference between us and Management is Management's kind of like an off-the-shelf API. You can't really like change that API. It has an API definition that you have to accept, and that might work for you, but for most people it doesn't. If you're building your own custom app using your own smart contract, you need certain endpoints, API endpoints that are custom to your product, and that's where the SubQuery piece comes in. So it's really about converting this kind of common blockchain structure to a structure that is completely custom to your application. So that may mean that if you're building an NFT marketplace, all I care about is the NFTs that I've minted, who currently owns them, what the transaction history with those NFTs were, and what the floor price is of this collection, right? And you can build APIs that give you those pieces of data in a much more efficient way than you can calculating that dynamically in the front end. Because you can't ask the blockchain what are the transaction history of this NFT. That's not a question that you can do in Management. That's like historic data, and you can't really ask that in a Management endpoint.
So I have some questions, the Frey, if I may. So obviously there's the graph as well that's doing something similar to you guys. So I have a question that's more around trust and integrity of data, because at the moment, for example, like basically everybody in the Cosmos relies on the integrity of Cosmos Station to provide accurate data in Mint Scan, right? So there's no one checking that. That is basically they're indexing and putting it into their database, and they're reading from their database. And, that's why we can have historical data from chains that have done like hard forks and stuff like that. But inherently, like, everybody is basically required to trust that data that they're serving up, right? So how, are there any checks and balances like that are able to be implemented into SubQuery, or how does it, prove the integrity of data?
We're keenly thinking about this all the time now, and so we provide a centralized hosting services for our customers. Most of the wallets, Explorers and Polkadot use it. We're doing like 400 million API calls per day through it. So, we do a lot there, but you're absolutely right. It's a centralized service. They're trusting us that we're going to get it wrong. And I guess it's a reputational sacrifice if we violate that, but correct, it is a trust. Nonetheless. So we're building a decentralized network, very similar to what the Graph's doing. The difference between us and what the Graph's doing is the Graph's decentralized network only supports their Ethereum projects and doesn't support projects from the other chains that they support. SubQuery.
The Graph have started doing Juno.
They've started working on Juno, and they've started working on Cosmos Hub, and we're kind of in the Avalanche space with them. We just entered that a couple months ago. There are some complaints about the Graph treating these new chains as like a second-class citizen. You don't really get the support, and you don't get the full functionality of the Graph. They kind of focus on their Ethereum customers primarily. We're trying to be a bit different about that. But your point around data validation, so SubQuery project can be open source. We try to make it so without you kind of doing something crazy, that SubQuery project will be deterministic as much as possible. And you have to turn a flag off to say this is not safe anymore when you disable that deterministicness, okay? If it's deterministic, that means two parties you can't verify automatically that the data is correct inside of a single project. There's too many mutations that might happen. But you can quickly verify, and we're built in the proof of indexing, we call proof of indexing, which is you can compare two different independent providers of that same data, and through Merkle mountain ranges, you can compare and confirm that they are exactly consistent in terms of the data they're providing. So unless they're in collusion, the data is valid across those two, and we have that inbuilt, and that is kind of critical to our decentralized network. So for you to become a data provider for our decentralized network, your hashes, your data must be completely consistent with everyone else. Otherwise, there's something going wrong here. There's something strange.
So theoretically, right? So say there's SubQuery main nodes doing their 400 million queries a day. So there could be say from each network there could be 2 or 3 other providers, even if they're not even serving data to customers. For example, they're just as an integrity check. So say if Kingnodes ran their own SubQuery servers and did their own indexing, and then basically had a publicly viewable cross-check with the main SubQuery database, so that you could establish trust by multiple providers, at least, who are
exactly
trusted
right.
people.
It's open source. You can run it yourself, and it's fine. But we're trying to go a bit further with that for our decentralized network. It's less so that we're running the servers. It's more so that anyone can run the servers, anyone can run those indexes, and they can index that data and sell that on the marketplace. Okay? So the vision here is that rather than just we run all the infrastructure and you guys do some checks, you can run the indexes just like you run validators for these networks, and you can earn rewards for that data that you sell to the marketplace. So if MintScan wanted to decentralize its infrastructure, it could create all these SubQuery projects that provide that data to their front end. And any validator, any individual could run that project themselves, and the network kind of proxies those off and rewards the indexes for what they do.
Is there any plan to have a implement a way to automatically? Well, I mean, you've got your marketplace, right? Would it be possible to have sort of single endpoints that distributes queries to a network?
That's the plan. And so you get performance from that, right? Because this is a read-only database. It's a content delivery network. It's a CDN. And if you're serving web pages from the internet, it means that web page is probably located in a data center closest to you. So the more indexes, the more performance you get, because it's read-only operations. And so the more indexes we create, that's the outcome that we're trying to push for. That's the outcome that we're trying to incentivize. And we're trying to incentivize, you can run, now you can run your own indexer in Outback Australia, and it means the millions of people in the Outback that want that data will get it from you.
The 3 cows in the paddock and the fucking sheep across the road will have great access to, So, I mean, that I'm impressed with that. That's exciting to me, because one of the, it's always been a gripe of mine that I think about, not talk about, is just that, we rely so much, for example, on MintScan. And if this is like an evolution of indexing, then in my book, that's pretty exciting. So,
and we're working with, for example, Polkadot, there is a similar version of MintScan that dominates the space and everyone has to use because the other tool everyone knows. And we're working with a person to actually build an open source version of MintScan that is built off a SubQuery project. So you can democratize that public good, which is the indexer, which is, it's critical. Also the explorer, it's a critical piece of infrastructure on any chain. And it means as more chains get launched, MintScan's backlog is going to get bigger. Maybe there should be an open source alternative where the teams themselves can implement it with some minimal, alterations.
So I think for Bold did build an explorer that is more or less open source, and you can run it and then it integrate it into the list and stuff like that. But that's completely other topic. But so back on SubQuery, I wanted to ask you, obviously when people build their own contracts and have their own message types and stuff in their own contracts, it's reasonably bespoke. And obviously SubQuery is not going to have, in my mind, SubQuery is not going to have the native ability to crawl contracts.
It does. It does.
Oh, does it? So when a contract's up, it can query that contract, determine the messages, and then decode basically.
So we have various different types of what we call trigger points. They're called mapping handlers, but I look at them as trigger points. And so your basic one is a block trigger. So every block that's added, we do something very simple. but very brute force. But we have more advanced ones, like for Cosmos, we have like a transaction. We have tons of transaction happens, we do something. But even better, every time a log is received, or a message is received, that filter that fits a certain like topic. When you like define topics and you trigger logs or events from those, we can filter down to those. You can like put in the filter of what exactly you're looking for, which means that I can define, like I did an example project which tracks all the vote events for the smart contract that is related to the Terra Developer Fund. So my project that's running has indexed every single vote made on any one of those Terra Development Fund proposals, and lists, the voting address, if they voted yes or no, what fund or proposal ID it was on, and the date and the block height that it happened. And that was a very simple process because I could just filter just that smart contract into certain events or that were related to that.
So what is the, breaking it down like to language for dummies like me with databases, what's the basic storage?
Postgres. We've spent decades optimizing databases. Like we've spent so long optimizing databases. So in here, there's a Postgres database that holds the data.
Not what I was going to say, but preempting what I'm trying to spit out of my head. So the data storage, like, are you storing individual messages that you pull out, or do you store like particular data from messages, or are you creating like a list of transactions, or are you creating like a list of messages, and how is it stored and how is it broken up in SubQuery? And I don't know if that's like within the scope of our discussion today. It could be a little bit out there, but I'm interested nonetheless.
No, that's fair enough. So think of a SubQuery project like a recipe, and the recipe has it has the ingredients. So for example, if your trigger point is on a certain event, that's your ingredient. Okay, so I received the event, and you define a very simple function that say, okay, I received a Cosmos event, and all I do is, for my one, for example, I just want certain things. I wanted the proposal ID, the vote, the voting address. So on my TypeScript function, I just like pull that piece of data out and I save that as a new like JavaScript object or a TypeScript object. Okay. So that TypeScript object gets put into the database. So we don't save everything willy-nilly. We kind of, when you're creating your SubQuery project, you're defining the shape of your data that you want at the end. You're defining your trigger points, and you're defining the mapping functions that take it from, a Cosmos event or a Cosmos block, and putting into the object that you want at the end of the day. So that's those three pieces, the trigger points, the mapping function, and the final result. Those are the three things you do when you create a SubQuery project, and we do the rest. We set up the indexer, we kind of reliably index all blocks according to the rules and the method that you've defined, and we spin up a database and a Postgres and a query endpoint that you can query that resulting data.
Okay, so basically, I understand it better now. So a user will tell it what it wants, and then basically you then store bespoke tables related to what they've asked for from the base of data. Like,
yeah,
it makes sense in my head.
Yeah. So James, if that definition changes over time, if you is it always from this point forward, or I can point it at an archive node and have it replay blocks and start recreating those other?
Absolutely. It goes from block. Yeah. It goes whatever block you want. So block 1 if you want, but I know Juno still starts at block like 300 something thousand, and does that procedure for every block up to now, and then as blocks are added, it updates.
And then if I add another query, like if I want to inspect a different area, I could just repoint it backwards and just rebuild it back up, and I build my new GraphQL structure off of that. That's pretty cool.
So if you want to keep it deterministic, you kind of have to go back and start again, because you don't want things to. It's trying to figure out how like fast the re-indexing, but retain that determinism, because again, that's critical.
For sure.
Like consistency. Tricky challenge.
So in terms of users then, what kind of costs typically is it to like index a project, say if you had 1 million blocks? And then how is it paid for? Is there like a SubQuery coin or?
It's open source. There will be a SubQuery token for the network, and that's how you reward indexers for doing the work that they do to index that data. We're working out the payment methods. We're trying to figure out how to make it work so that end users don't have to pay for it. They kind of get sponsored by the application owner. But we also have a hosted service where we run a large amount of infrastructure right now, and we have we give it away for free for small customers just to get up and started. But we have arrangements with those big wallets or explorers that use millions of requests per day and have huge data sets. And that's we just kind of cover our costs there. But it's essentially open source, and if you want to run it yourself, if you want to start building with it and power your app off it, you can do it without even talking to us.
Kind of curious if you can run it on a cache. Actually, that would be pretty cool. With all of that like luxurious amount of free time I have, I'd love to have a go at indexing Juno and run it on the cache.
This is the one thing, right? That we're adding heaps of chain support, but there's like so many different chains in Cosmos that we don't really have the time to go through and like test them with each. So we're really interested to hear from different chains, from teams in different chains, that if it's working.
Sorry, I don't mean indexing a cache. I mean run an index node, an indexing instance of SubQuery on a cache as a container, because a cache is just a marketplace for compute on Cosmos, right? That you can access via IBC. So let's say I'm building a social protocol, because maybe I am. Maybe that's controlled by a DAO, because maybe it is, and maybe we want to run an indexer for some type of content that comes up in the service. You could conceivably run your own, the DAO could run its own SubQuery instance on a cache and then pay for it in AKT via IBC straight out of the DAO treasury, which would be pretty cool.
Which you can buy over ICA.
Which you can buy, you can buy over IBC. I don't think you need ICA for. Oh, well, you're talking about the thing. Yeah, you need the tokens first, right, in order to transact over IBC. So
no. Well, I'm talking about the wallet-to-wallet swap.
You're talking about the fancy. Yeah, that was really helpful. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I don't know why I just said fancy like that. It was descriptive of anything. I
knew exactly what you were talking about. We're like
the fancy, yeah. Exactly. Using the fancy, the double stop, the double hop transaction over IBC, the fancy. So and people who I know there are some people who are listening to this who also listen to the dev podcast we did earlier today. So when James has already described a blockchain as a linked list, which you also encountered earlier today. So when we had a little bit of a tangent on applicative functors and mapping functions earlier, and why iterators are pretty good in Rust smart contracts, that mapping function that we spent maybe a little bit too long getting to the weeds over is basically how SubQuery works as well. So it goes to show you that developers rambling about concepts, sometimes those concepts are universally applicable to hard problems. So so I guess the final question I'd have, James, like what, other than obviously that you guys, you folks are kind of launching your own chain and whatnot, what's exciting on the roadmap that those of us who may be application developers, should be like excited about coming from SubQuery and kind of looking out for?
Yeah, well, so as our teams focus on making this indexer as reliable, as fast, efficient, open as possible, right? And it means that we're constantly building new improvements to it. So an example is that hosted service. We're just improving the scalability of that, adding new features to that. The network, which we're trying to launch, we just had a test network. We had about 150 indexes, simulated about 200 million API requests in the test network, and we're rolling onto a mainnet soon. We'll have a Cosmos project on there probably as well. We're doing a lot of interesting features around these performance improvements. That's always the number one thing, is make it faster and better. But also features around, so you can make a SubQuery project that is mutable. And mutable, for those who don't know, means data inside of it updates. So, for example, if you're indexing the current owner of an NFT, that data will change all the time as that NFT is sold. We've added a new feature recently that keeps track of all historic mutations of that. So you can ask your SubQuery project, what was the state of the world at this particular point in time?
So event sourcing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
So you can ask like what was the balance at this point. If you're indexing like the balances of all assets that wallets have, you can ask how much did they have at this time. I guess you can kind of figure that out. But like there's points here where, or what was the APY of a DeFi protocol at this point in time, and how has it changed? So those are kind of interesting features we're working on adding. But of course, more chain support is always one thing. We're going to be supporting. We've got a goal of about 8 different chains by the end of the year, and we're kind of 3, almost. You could say 4, but now 3, thanks to Terra's demise.
It sounds like someone might actually be able to make some effective fucking tax software based on SubQuery.
Hey, let's not get ahead of ourselves there.
Yeah, my accountants would be happy about that at the moment.
Yeah, it's like in the Cosmos, it's just impossible to work out your tax.
Oh, everyone's having issues, is that right? Yeah, it's.
Mm-hmm. I had to write my own software based on MapReduce, as it happens. But obviously, my accountants can't run it because it's a closure project. So they were really excited. They were like, "Oh, you've written software to do your taxes. Oh, is this something we can resell?" And I was like, "If you know Lisp." If you're happy to run a REPL, it's bang easy, but
at least we don't live in the States for tax.
Governments around the world are going to account for like 300 million of your 400 million daily queries on SubQuery.
But so just because that final point you talked about, where it kind of sounded like it was an event sourcing based solution where you're calculating the delta right between 2 points, and that's how you're moving the index forward. Is that a fundamental reimagining of how SubQuery does stuff, or is that an additional product that is essentially doing event sourcing for? Because for those that I guess don't do lots of log streaming stuff, there's basically 2 models. One of them is you just log the value at every point in time, and you just keep track of an entity, and then you as an application developer decide what to do when you are told it changes. An example of this would be something like a smack stack where you have Apache Kafka writing to Cassandra. So you have a database, and then you have like a log streaming thing. Callum. Yes, I managed to make it an hour without mentioning Lisp. Well done. Or you have something where the database and the log are the same thing, like in event sourcing, where you say, okay, well, I actually only care about what can be computed at a point in time, which might be now, in which case what I actually need to do is compute the deltas. So I don't know how many people listening or listening to the playback later.
Yeah, we're storing the states at different points of view. We're saying the state was like this between blocks X and Y. We're computing and storing the delta is a fundamental reimagining of how you do that, and I think it's a little bit of a step too far. But from state was this at X to Y, and from Y to Z it was this. You could obviously backtrack and compute the delta.
Okay, so you're going about it that way rather than the event sourcing model where it is. I know some very, very smart people that did some work on geolocated event sourcing. I think it might have even been for a demonstrator project in New Zealand, of all places. It was
there's so many people here.
Yeah, well, they were based in the north of England, so but it was. I think the original purpose was like for tracking emergency services or something, saying like, oh, where was a given point reported at a given point in time. And then they ended up pivoting the whole company towards like, where is a customer in a supermarket at a given point in time, which, as it turns out, is a really hard problem to solve and very interesting, but doesn't actually translate to bucks in the cash register. So nobody bought it. But lots of fun to think about anyway. I'm going to shut up. Null, Usurper, do you have any final questions for James?
Oh, yeah. But it's not related to SubQuery.
It's a New Zealand thing.
Yeah.
James, go ahead.
No, it's mean. I'm not going to say it.
Bloody Aussies.
I mean, completely unrelated to anything blockchain or Cosmos. So I think this is like, similar around the world now. Everyone's pushing up interest rates, and New Zealand is probably ahead of the curve on pushing up interest rates. And you guys are getting it pretty hard there, right? So the reason I ask is because traditionally the news is pretty full of shit, and I don't really look at it that often. But lately, on my Google News feed on my phone, I keep seeing all this shit about the New Zealand house market imploding, etc. Any truth to it, or is it all media bullshit?
It's not imploding yet. It's saying like the New Zealand house market's been one of the hottest house markets for the last 5 years, right? House prices here went up like 28% last year. So it's not imploding. It's actually like stagnating, slightly going down a little bit, but like compared to what it was doing last year, it's like, oh wow. Still, it's kind of like the house prices in Sydney, right? It's almost like London, I think, where it's just ridiculous. But outside,
well, even here, like in the news relating to our housing market, it's like the news headlines are like Sydney completely fucked, Melbourne completely fucked, but like they've still got a clearance rate on auctions and stuff like that. So it's really hard to decipher what in the hell is going on with it. But I mean, I don't own a house, so it doesn't really bother me.
I'm the same. I can't be bothered buying houses right now. It's I'm just waiting for everything to fuck up in like 12 months or so. That's the time to have cash.
Yeah, it's interesting, like where it's all going, because I don't really want to go. I could talk about the local economies here for days and just bore the shit out of everyone. But I wanted to ask you about that. So
Usurper's like, where even are these places? Are they?
They have
like,
economies.
An hour in, he's like, wait, these guys aren't in America. Where
these guys
are
aren't
they?
in the same country. I thought New Zealand was a state of Australia.
I do know the difference between those two. I am trying to figure out what exactly the local economy looks like in the bush over there. And is that like how many kangaroo pelts you get for a gallon of koala milk? What are we talking about here?
Fleece, but unfortunately, it's been really down low for a long time. Like we've only had just the American billionaires fly over before COVID to really fleece, and they're arguing a bit, getting a bit too snowy about the subject.
We literally sell bags of chicken shit on the side of the road. So.
We do it. We do horse shit on the side of the road.
and like we sell rocks
to throw at your neighbors, or like what? What's the utility here?
Well,
what do you do with chicken shit
Australia's
anyway? That's not fertilizer, is it?
Is that based on the ability of Australia to sell rocks to China?
Basically, it's how much shit can we dig out of the ground and convince China to buy before they explode us with nuclear bombs.
They write that on the bills, right? Isn't that at the bottom of the bill? Like, no, they don't.
I think it's like in the UK on the money it says like, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of blah, and it has like the address of the Bank of England.
Yeah.
You obviously can't bloody do that anymore, but in Australia it says like, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the amount of rocks equivalent to.
Oh no, it's probably coal. Probably the equivalent of coal or something.
Yeah, it's actually. It's a reserve currency. It's a reserve currency. In case people listening weren't aware of that, like it still does have a reserve, but it's primarily rocks and koalas. So
we have coal, iron, oil, and gas. It's like
so you're basically Russia. But like in the southern hemisphere.
Nobody to sell to. Like, everything's got to go on a boat.
People like Australia.
Does that make New Zealand like Ukraine or something, or is that
no? We're friends. We're like Canada to the US,
We couldn't get the rock out of the ground without Kiwis, probably. So They come with
That sounded like a threat, like weirdly. It's like we'll get that rock out of the but you'll be sorry about joking about those rocks out of the ground.
A famous prime minister or like president, for the Americans listening, of New Zealand once said this famous quote back when someone said, the migration rate to Australia is through the roof right now, and the prime minister said, well, it's not a bad thing. It raises the IQ of both countries.
Wow.
Pretty funny. That's pretty good.
Ironically, I've worked in New Zealand to get money when I was at uni. I came over there. Yeah, it costs like so much money to buy steak over there. It's ridiculous. The food and cost of living is fucking madness in New Zealand, and they pay you like half of what they pay you here. It's bizarre. But I must say, it is an incredibly beautiful country. And, some of the places out there, like the glowworm caves in Waitomo, and down south, like around like Milford Sound and those places around there, just incredibly beautiful.
Kingnodes desperately trying to save his New Zealand delegates right now. Backpedaling.
No. Like when I went down there, I traveled around quite a bit, and yeah, man, it's like so in Australia, the places you go see which are serene and pretty are like over in WA in the middle of the desert. They're like red and green. It's a different type of landscape, right? But when you go to New Zealand, it's like rolling hills and green grass and big lakes and hills.
It's Wales, but massive. It's Wales, but it's massive, lads.
It's different to here, but it's just completely beautiful, and it's a great thing to go and see. If anyone's thinking of traveling anywhere post-COVID, go check out New Zealand.
So everybody, you've been listening to Game of Travel Agents with Kingnodes, your friendly local travel agent. Kingnodes.com for all your travel needs to Australia and New Zealand. They'll organise you package holidays, trips to the outback, and
we even pick you up from the airport,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Personally pick you up.
Powered by SubQuery. So it's time to do a little bit of wrap up and hopefully not get rugged this week by Null. So we had a few quick questions for Game of Nodes during the week, which were, and James, feel free to jump in if you have an answer to a question, even though they've kind of been asked in our direction. We've been asked a couple of questions about Nomic. Isn't Nomic mainnet? Like literally,
is it Nomic or Nomic?
Nomic.
No.
Nomic. The mainnet is this week, next week? You two are validating it, right? Wait, where are the windows tiled?
Are you pointing at me?
Usurper. Yeah, I'm trying to point to the two of you. You're both validating Nomic, right? That's going live next week or the week after?
I'm not. Usurper probably is.
I am. The date, I don't have the exact date in front of me because I think we're going to talk about it. It is, somebody in the chat might know as well. I believe it is next week.
I have a question for you, Usurper. If Nomic mainnet is just now going live, what the fuck has been live for like the last couple of months?
Yeah, we were talking about this on the Game of Nodes channel. So it's just been really staking up to this point, right? Because the idea is that this is a bridge for a Bitcoin bridge. So it is, I guess we're up to the point where everybody's just auto compounding like crazy to be able to build this up and build a pretty uneven delegate structure in these 100 validators. Yeah, basically.
Pre-mine for like 3 months.
So basically, I think that's the end of the scamming period, is it?
Exactly. Yeah. Now we can actually do something here. So it is. Yeah. There you go. So Callum and Pup was just said StakeNet, which is a nice way of saying what I just said. So it's live and we're staking. And so I think I'm trying to find the date exactly when that's going to launch. So then I think the new UI will be able to be available, and then we'll start having some exchange, other types of things that are going to happen. So I actually haven't seen too many. They don't communicate quite the same way as other chains. So it's been difficult to somewhat keep up with, will
this be rectifying some of so is there still going to be the weird shit that they've got in the StakeNet as what they're going to have in mainnet? Like or have they already fixed it where they, for example, didn't have the ability to unjail or something like that?
They do run this again. Some keeping. I think they do run a separate UI or CLI that sits in front of the Tendermint SDK, and so I'm not sure if that's Rust based. I think somebody told me that was Rust based. Somebody's going to say if it is or not. Right?
Built their own. They built their own application on top of Tendermint, and it's not based on the Cosmos SDK.
Okay. So behind the scenes, it has some of the same components that are in there, and there's some front end to be able to perform some of those tasks. But I think like the wallet structure and where that's held, some of the other commands obviously are quite different. And now a little bit, now I don't know if it's on par, but early on it was a little bit restrictive in terms of what was available to you. Even things like being able to, enable something like a tender duty to be able to monitor. It was difficult to even get the developer address out of that. But now that's all somewhat changed, and there's ways to be able to do that and things like that. So, but there hasn't been that many. I was actually trying to go back and see how many actual upgrades there's been in those periods as well. And I think there was only 1 or 2 during the StakeNet period. So I assume there's another one obviously coming for the upgrade here, and we'll see what happens.
That's like that's a weekends of upgrades for like Uni 3.
Yeah, seriously, it's 8. Yeah. It's not much.
It's more or less. Obviously there's some things that are different, but it's approaching feature parity versus the SDK on core stuff, basically.
That's a pretty weak example for me, but in my eyes, at least some of those things are coming in.
If you can monitor,
I assume there's a lot more to it behind there.
If you can monitor the node using standard Tendermint monitoring tools, that's a good start.
It's a start.
Well, I mean, because this is the thing that you've been talking about with James this entire episode is, the beauty of Cosmos SDK or Cosmos more generally is that you should be able to run one thing against all chains with very little modification and kind of get results, or at least be able to diagnose them yourself. So I think, if you're saying that, given that they're now advertising this is mainnet for real lads, the fact that stuff is now starting to work suggests that their implementation is now in a good place. Which is good to hear. I'm excited. I'm excited primarily because people were talking about it in Prague as potentially a Rust implementation on top of the SDK that would work. And as we know, I am a unashamed Rust maxi when it comes to Rust versus Go. So,
and actually, I don't see anything official about what that data is. Callum also talked about maybe next week, but I haven't seen anything on the Twitter and other types of things. I think all I've heard is like it's been through other people. Now that reason I feel uncomfortable talking about this is I don't know if I've actually seen something myself, but we'll see kind of what happens.
Cool. We have one more thing on here, which is interchain security, but I think honestly, let's kick that to next week now because that's a big one, and we can. There's just I managed to really kick
conversation
with that one.
Security. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of stuff that I managed to stir up with that one, and there's some very good points from many people who are much smarter than me. So we'll kick that to the next episode and make sure that they're given the time they deserved. And actually, maybe we were talking about this. We could get like somebody who's particularly knowledgeable about things to come along and join the show because we've been shuffling the guests around a little bit recently. So final thing of the week, which we have actually managed to get to for once, the entire spreadsheet. What are you most excited? What are you most excited about this week in the Cosmos? Usurper?
Shit. I mean, I think about this for a few weeks.
Yeah.
Just me and Null escalating rugging.
Yeah, right. All right, I guess I do have something. So one thing that started this week, one conversation I had out of almost by accident a little bit. Actually, not so much by accident. When Daniel was out from Stakefish a few weeks ago, and he was on Game of Nodes, that gave us the opportunity to be able to talk after that. And then they were meeting down in Consensus, and there was a group called the Validator Commons, which I think I'll put a link into. Which there's MetaGov and Stakefish is in there. I believe Cosmos Station might be in there. There's a few others, and there's some research individuals in there as well. And it's having some conversations around governance in the Cosmos. This is very Cosmos specific, although those chains also talk about validator governance outside the Cosmos as well. I think actually it might be more than just the Cosmos based. And I think having a conversation, I opened my mouth in that meeting and was just talking a little bit around just what's happening, at least in our ecosystem with validators and kind of how validators grow and those types of things. And they have some pretty detailed conversations and discussions around, I think, both the validator and foundation relationship and kind of the economy of that and those types of things. And then so that's been pretty interesting. I'm starting to be involved a little bit in those conversations just to better understand it and then hopefully, get more people involved. And then the other thing that started this week was also coming out was this Cosmos Validators League, which we've talked a little bit. And I know that you guys, Null and Frey, have been involved with as well. And that is another group which is now growing pretty large in terms of the number of Cosmos validators that have been involved. That came up out of Thyborg and also Ghost from Whisper. And that is also talking about just trying to look at different ways to provide delegators with a good understanding of value from validators in the Cosmos. Is that a fair statement, guys? And the idea of being able to maybe make UX changes or other types of things that help more than just VP. And how do we find other ways to be able to show value and either giving back or both? I guess I should sum it up to say qualitative and quantitative ways to be able to show value. And so those conversations have been also pretty big. We'll put links to the show notes, I guess, to both of these. So if there's validators who have not involved in either of those, it'd be interesting for people to get involved in that. So I think that, I don't know if that's the most interesting thing I'm excited for, but I do think these conversations are really good. And I think that there's a lot of viewpoints in both these areas, but I'm not sure of exactly what's going to come out of either one because there's, it's a lot of people involved with different kind of backgrounds and needs, but it's pretty cool, I guess. Any comments from you guys on those?
Yeah, well, I had like a pretty lengthy conversation yesterday with Thyborg, who I think is like effectively, I'm not sure if I said his name right either, but he's effectively like, the spring from which the fountain has come with this, validator, let's say, assessment. And actually we invited him to out of this, we invited him to the delegations DAO, which we're looking at on Juno, because I think he's got the right attitude towards that, and is reasonably non-biased and that type of stuff as well. So, but had a pretty decent conversation with him about like how that process might look, and the pitfalls and dangers of doing something like that, and especially if they, for example, became the default wallet that people use to do staking, right? So then you're sort of actively, ranking people and encouraging directly delegations to certain people, and like how do you manage the responsibility of that? And a lot of it would be subjective. A lot of contributions aren't on chain. How do you make all that assessment and create that criteria to be able to effectively achieve what they want to, and things along those lines? It's quite a complex subject. Yeah. And the problem is for delegators, like it's a difficult thing for delegators. Because obviously, as a delegator, if you're fresh into the Cosmos, you want the thing that's going to get you the most money, right? So you come in, you see a thing that you're going to get money back out of, you delegate to them, and then your job's done. You click on, restake or whatever, and off you go, off to the races. But, so if you're like a RHINO and you're providing like RPCs for Stargaze, that's on chain. But if you're like a Pokechoo and you index things and put them on your website, that's not on chain. And then assessment of that type of thing is pretty subjective, but they provide a lot of value to the entire Cosmos through doing that. So there's a lot of moving parts when you're trying to rank people or that type of thing. So, I suggested to them that maybe like instead of ranking people, you keep it like a random listing, but maybe red flag people, like have agreed criteria, maybe even voted criteria that, if you represent the top 30% of the vote on a chain or something, then you just get wrapped up and pushed to the bottom, and then the remaining might get just scattered around a list. Or even, there could be a red flag system where if you do certain things, then the you get put in a roll up of a red flag line. If you want to look at the red flags, you can go and, if you hate the eco, you can go and vote to all those people and stuff like that. But you have to think about that type of stuff. You can't just go, fuck it, we want to like make a list and then make a list.
There's a list now. So the question is the list going to be better than the list that exists now? And
the list that exists now is not right.
So there's a bunch of points that have been made in the chat. I just want to quickly highlight.
I'm just going to have to run as well, guys, but I really appreciate coming on today. I need to run for the meeting.
James, I apologize for bringing this topic
up.
But
no, it's awesome. I want to stay and talk about this because we're trying to work out DAOs as well, but it's life. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
See you.
So Potmos has said whitelist and validated cartels are anti-community. There's been a facetious respect the cartel, and then I think the second comment that Potmos made on this is actually very, very important, which is validators decide the criteria is an equation for cartel behavior. And I think that's the root of my uncomfortableness with a lot of those like validators we should get together and whatever is essentially that. And I think it's also just that too many validators are up on more than one chain as well. Like, as in, I think in an ideal world, the economics would be the case that you would only validate one chain. We validate 2 and we're going to validate 3 soon. It's not impossible given that technically we're supposed to, assuming Passage actually makes it, we're supposed to validate Passage, that would be up on 4. And that's at the point where I'm, as a part of an organization validating more than one chain, I'm going, well, that's it's not great, is it? Like, and then that's before you've even really thought about, as white labels and all the other complex stuff. So, I think like Noel was saying, whatever the metrics are, it's probably should be up to the community to decide, but then the community is going to decide on an economic basis at the moment. Because it's conflate. The problem we have, like in a nutshell, is that we've conflated economic incentives and political incentives. And what's happened is we've got people buying votes. Let's call it what it is. People are buying votes, and that's the problem. And this is a very, very solved problem. You don't let people buy votes in a democracy. You make it hard for them to do so using law.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have that. We just have this loose social consensus.
Yeah.
So it's a really hard problem to solve.
I agree. I agree with Noel's point too. And I don't want to recreate rankings and those types of things. I do think that there's a real dark spot of education. And I think some of these other types of things around what makes value more than just what that ranking is. And even like, I understand the idea of like having validators come together and trying to build a UI seems like collusion, but you have one validator building a UI right now, right? Like that's what MintScan is, right? Even though it's community driven and it's open source, you still, it's kind of a small group that's being able to decide how that looks and why the first 10 of those spots are colored differently than the other ones that exist in that validator list. So I think that there could be more to be added on chain. I think there'd be more to be added off chain. I think there's probably rules for indexers in this to be able to have other types of things. Like a good example is missed blocks. Like those things, most of those RPC nodes are just looking at the last 100 blocks. I'd like to see it for the last year. Show me downtime over the last 365 days across validators, maybe from when they bonded. Yeah. Like that's much more valuable to me. MintScan shows number of votes. But if somebody just joined, it shows that they missed, if there's 30 governance proposals and I was just a validator for the last one, it shows me as 1 out of 30. And so it looked like, what the hell did I do? I just got here. So like those types of things, and those aren't necessarily their issues. I mean, those are indexing RPC issues, and there's a technology gap there, which I think now maybe a tool like this or other tools that exist can help solve that. And those things are, I don't think, incredibly difficult UX problems, but it definitely has a huge impact. And so I do think the idea of validators getting together, at least talk about what's important, is fine. And if that looks differently and there's other ways to be able to add that data, whether it's on or off, I think there's nothing wrong with that to make people make good decisions.
There's
I had a thought last night. So I had a pretty lengthy conversation in my night last night with some guys from Orbital Apes because, well, yesterday I flamed them on Twitter a bit and I got a lot of heat for it. But, we had a conversation with them last night. And one thing that occurred to me while I was talking to them was that, maybe a good interface is basically a staking interface that doesn't say anything about any validators. And you just click a button that says scatter stake. And then, you pick the amount of validators you want to go to, 10, click scatter stake, and it just goes even across all of them. This is like
the bit in the Matrix where he's down on the floor. It's like, what's happening? It's like he's starting to believe. Null's finally suggested his first solution that involves a random number generator.
I love it.
And I'm like, yes, finally, I've said random number generator enough times.
Just sprays it around to wherever, because at the end of the day, does it even matter? As long as you make the blocks.
He's starting to believe, fellas.
I think there has to be some other changes where it does matter. I think the governance thing kind of is a sticker in this. I'm going back to this whole idea around governance or validators voting for non-voting shares. I think that does make some differences. And so I think there's some values in there that would make difference. And then if governance changes and that we separate that piece of it or some other way of doing that, maybe it's a DAO structure and now there's a subset of DAOs that make, or a subset within that DAO that makes decisions versus just this on-chain type thing from a validator perspective, then I think, you could just spray it, be done.
Well, some think that, validators shouldn't even be involved with governance. Some, not me, but, some do.
I do.
I don't, I think. I think there's almost certainly better ways of doing it. But
I think there's better ways of doing it. Yeah.
My red hottest take. I don't know if this is my red hottest take. They all get so perennially spicier.
Mm-hmm.
The meme where it's just like the dial, and it's just like how, like the what's it? It's like an old drill tweet, isn't it? Turning the dial and looking back at the audience, and then turning the dial again is the tweet. It's something like that, and it's just like a classic shit posting meme. And that's kind of what I feel like with some of my takes. I'm just like, turn the dial, look back. I'm like, no, okay, they're still here. Right, you can turn it a bit more. Like, I think I've gone from there might be a problem with proof of stake to like, let's eliminate validators, lads, to let's eliminate vote. No, I don't even know.
Right.
But I think I think there is a bit of me that would like to make a cartel chain.
Cartel chain?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's a cartel anyway. So just admit it's a cartel and say, okay, lads, this is the cartel. Here are your validators for the evening. And then once you kind of admit, like, well, I mean, I suppose this is what Foucault would say or whatever. I think it's Foucault, isn't it? Like, you can only critique what you can only critique what you have language for, right? So if it is a cartel, you have to call it a cartel before you can critique it and build a solution. And like maybe a set of 125 validators is by its very nature essentially going to tend towards a cartel. And then, maybe the voting power is not the problem, but who votes? Each validator could have its own DAO structure of delegators who actually assign the vote that the validator should do. You could do jury duty voting. A random delegator has to vote on behalf of the validator, and if that person's AFK, then eventually it drops down to the validator, let's say a day before the voting window or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
There are some very interesting things you could do with that vote, but then also, should it's back to kind of, should voting be tied to economic power? Like, it's done as an anti-Sybil thing, but actually fundamentally results in vote buying, which is something we've decided in every advanced democracy is a bad thing. So yeah, the combination of vote power plus economics seems to me to be like not desirable. Like the thing validators want is stability of income to provide infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
That's the primary concern. And I think with Prop 16 we saw that like not all of us we don't mind stepping up for the community, but we're not always like, yay, let's get into politics on behalf of our delegators.
Right.
Yes, good point. Partial match as well on anonymous voting, and ZK voting would be awesome, but you need like addressable off-chain storage to do the ceremony. It's quite complicated, or relayers. So we're not in a position to do it.
Lots of smart people.
I seriously apologize for bringing this topic up at an hour and 40 in.
Yeah, we need Henry on here to talk about private voting. We talked about getting Henry from Penumbra on, and he did say yes on Twitter, so that's legally binding. So
all right, Noel, what are you excited about this week?
Well, what's the date? I don't know. T-Grade's coming up, so people just actually mentioning proof of engagement in the comments there. And T-Grade's going to launch like on the 27th, I think, or something like that. It's imminent now. So I'm pretty happy to see that coming up. It's quite different to anything else there is out there. And I want to see how it unfolds, really. But yeah, other than that, I'd be excited to see some fucking green candles.
There is on the board here. This is all because US raised 0.75% or something like that today, and it's all green candles for the last hour. But I'm sure that'll sell off tomorrow, and we'll be back.
Oh man, everything's like across the board. Everything's getting smoked at the moment. It's
yeah.
Well, anyway, but yeah. Also, the hack DAO I think is going to go to vote soon on Juno. So I'm excited to see the DAOs starting to roll out now. Working on a delegations DAO for Juno, which I'm kind of excited about. But then again, it comes down to like, assessing people on an individual level, and it's quite subjective, and I'm interested to see how it all pans out. To date, it's Core One who's been doing the assessment. And I think we're looking for like quite a diverse mix of people for that particular DAO. Not just, there'll be some validators and some core people, but like I said, for example, I don't know how you say it, Thyborg is a community person. He's not he's not a validator. He's not a dev. He's interested and pragmatic about it. So need more people like him around the place as well. Yeah, so excited about the DAOs. Def name the Frey. What are you excited about, bud?
I know I've been talking about this since early May. This because my to-do list catching up after the Prop 16 bullshit has been so long to get through all of it, plus all this stuff with Howl and everything. Like, there's just a lot to do. But tomorrow is starting to sync in a cache node on a cache day.
Nice.
Which will be a fun day, probably, of swearing at the screen. And yeah, I'm also got a bunch of some kind of semi-secret, top secret stuff going on as well. There's just like so many projects and things on the go, which I think there's some stuff I'll be working on the next week, which I've wanted to work on for quite a long time and haven't had time, and that's going to be really exciting. And some of that ties quite closely into the sort of things we've been talking about around validator stuff and whatnot. So going to be getting to dick around with some Rust and some stuff and some SDK and some fun times. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, and everybody should also check out your Cosmoverse
Oh yeah, the
educational series with Callum. Like watched that one today, and I thought that was, you guys were it was the basic stuff, right? Just kind of get an environment set up and those types of things. But I'm excited. I don't know anything about it. I'm excited to just understand a little bit.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, people should watch Cosmoverse for Dummies. Cosmoverse by Dummies, which is the podcast that Callum and I have started doing. First episode shows you how to bootstrap a local dev environment with Juno. Next episode, next week, Wednesday, 1400 UTC. We're going to be deploying first smart contract, showing you contract lifecycle and stuff like that, building on this week's episode. They're going to be every sort of week, every 2 weeks, as we have the time to do them in between, actually working on smart contracts. But yeah, we're going to go through some of that stuff. There'll be a third episode on doing like a simple front end for that contract as well. And then we'll probably do some stuff where we basically update the Juno docs for a bunch of little bits. And we'll also probably use some of the teaching materials in Callum's Cosmoverse 10K subs Vim docs. Yeah, okay. Callum did a really good, there's a GitHub repo called Cosmoverse 0 to Hero. I always say Hero to Zero because of the Beta Band album, 0 to Hero, which is really good learning resource. If you're already a programmer and you're already a little bit comfortable with the SDK and you can just like kind of crack on and use that. And so we'll probably use that repo because Callum's already done all the hard work as a bit of a basis for doing some of the future lessons and stuff as well. And we'll also obviously be taking viewer questions like we do with Game of Nodes. So
very cool.
Go and check that out if you're interested.
Before we go, we talked about this last week, I think. Quick show. No, people said please don't rug this week, so I'm respecting the comments, and we'll hopefully sign out properly. But quick show of hands. TMKMS now. We're all here, right?
Well, Giuseppe's moving in the direction of Horcrux, right?
I am.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that's the next step we can ask every week. Are you on Horcrux yet? So
I know, seriously,
we plan to move there pretty soon. We're everything TMKMS now, but we want to move to Horcrux as well. But last we spoke about it, you were moving to TMKMS, the Frey, right?
Yeah, we're now everything on TMKMS, including actually testnet stuff, because we don't want any setups to be kind of different to other ones. And I think we're going to start doing like rolling destroys of some of our nodes now, because the signer is on TMKMS. It's highly available.
Right.
Everything else is garbage, really. We can just like throw it away, build up a new node from scratch. Use one of Polka's snapshots that we talk about so much because they're really, really useful. And then just like point the signer at it. Bam, we're done.
Shout out to Polka working with Tom on Cosmos Omnibus and creating the API to be able to programmatically access the his snapshots. So one of the problems has been with Cosmos Omnibus is having to specify snapshots when you deploy to a cache. And now you can programmatically, it's coming up, I assume. They've been working on it, but I believe the plan is to be able to access an API which will direct to the latest Polka snapshot, which are regularly pruned. So historically, like if you start up in a cache node with Cosmos Omnibus, you can be hanging around for quite a while waiting for it to download a snapshot. So getting ready access to up-to-date.
I think that actually is done as of Tom pushed an update to Omnibus literally like yesterday.
Oh, really?
So yeah, he mentioned it on Monday. So Tom spoke at an event that we run in London, and Tom's a great guy, and he's going to be coming on the show in a few weeks. So yeah,
that is awesome, and that feeds into your rolling destroys on a cache. So you can now, for instance, run a Horcrux cluster on 5 nines, and then have your you could theoretically reliably have your entire century structure on a cache now. So that's what we want to do. We want to have one node that's not a cache to begin with, and a couple of nodes on a cache, and see how that starts out. We might start with a uni, and if it works well, we might move it on to maybe Juno mainnet, and then go from there.
Good thing I have a colo rack with 10 servers and 5 terabytes of memory, and so that's good timing.
Yeah. I guess that
you can start running SubQuery, mate. Make some
seriously, I'm going to have to.
What's the benefit that you're going to get from Horcrux by the time you're on because if you're on TMKMS and like you're running a TMKMS box on AWS,
sure.
So we're kind of foolishly running it exactly on what it says in the specs in that blog post they did, where they definitely overspec like fuck. So it's like an R5A XL or something. It's like got 32 gig RAM, and it's like for one Rust service. Yeah, it doesn't need that much RAM. So I mean, at some point we'll size it down. But even at that size, it only requires a tiny hard drive. It's only costing $120 a month.
Yeah.
Something like that. So even at that position, like that box is basically going to stay up forever. Like until you need to restart it, and by the time you need to like restart it, you're going to be like moving up to a new version of Ubuntu or something, and just wanting to rebuild the box from scratch, right?
Yeah.
So it feels to me like all you're doing with Horcrux is then having to rebuild 3 boxes rather than rebuild 1 box when you do actually do really critical validator maintenance, like an LTS version goes out of LTS, that kind of thing.
The advantage of Horcrux is whether you use a 1-of-1 Horcrux or 98 of 100 Horcrux or whatever. The advantage of Horcrux is you can point it at multiple nodes, so it provides redundancy that way. So if you, for example, have a cache node and a main node, like say on DigitalOcean or on bare metal or in your backyard or whatever, and your internet goes out, then it can pick up the slack on a cache, or you might scatter them all over the place, but it's you don't have to then go and manually repoint your TMKMS node, and also it's hard to keep a spare node ready and synced as a spare for your TMKMS, because it won't progress blocks until you connect a TMKMS instance to it, which means it could have a lot of catch up to do unless you keep it synced, and then you have to manually go and change it to accept a connection from your TMKMS, but then you actually have to restart it. And if that's on a cache, restarting it might mean that you have to actually redeploy the instance. So
you just shouldn't run that on a cache. You should just run that on AWS.
No, your Sentry node I'm talking about.
Oh, right, yeah, okay, yeah.
Because you have to change.
It would take a couple of seconds, yeah.
Yeah, well, with persistent storage now it would, but previously they didn't have persistent storage, and if you had to restart it, you have to download a snapshot and resync. So it could take quite a long time. Like I used to run a Juno testnet validator on a cache a while ago just as a test. And it was interesting when I told Jacob, of course, Jacob wanted to destroy my toy. So it had a RPC port open on it as well. And basically he just spammed the shit out of the RPC port until the process failed. And it reset, but it couldn't get back up to the head before it got jailed. So while it did come back up, it got jailed. It was interesting. But it just takes a long time. But now, there's beginning to be some more options available to be able to reliably use a cache to, have a no downtime setup. So it's certainly, and it's a big step. I can't express enough how much of a big step it is to be able to get direct access via an API to people who are providing snapshots around the community. Anyway, that's my
it's pretty rad. So That's also what I'm excited about this week. So it's going to be pretty fucking rad. Let's go.